Hello. Can everyone hear me okay? We're all good? Yeah, nice. So now Tom has kind of pimped this too much, so I feel like under pressure now. But bear with me. So I'm the senior designer at Code for America. I am obviously not American. I used to work for the UK government in this department, originally in a team that didn't exist, and then later in a team that formed up around us that became the Government Digital Service. I'm not sure if you would say we were secret at the start, Tom, but I think we might have been a bit. But to give everyone a flavour, pardon? It was all legit, yes, it was all legit. To give everyone a flavour of what we were doing, who don't know about GDS and the work we did, I thought I'd play a little video because I mostly really like this video, and it's narrated by someone who's much more charismatic than I am. Why are you no play? Oh, it's playing, good.
Hi, I'm Nadia Aliwami. I work at the Government Digital Service, and I'm here to tell you about GovUK. We launched gov.uk in October 2012. It replaced the two big central government websites, DirectGov and BusinessLink. The idea was to make something simpler, clearer and faster, something focused on users. Firstly, we took a careful look and worked out what services and information we actually needed to deliver. We thought, for instance, that we could probably stop spending taxpayers' money telling people how to haggle when abroad, or how to identify different kinds of waves. We eliminated thousands of pages that no one ever visited. Then we made sure that the information we were providing was as easy to find and to follow as possible. This, for example, is the page on DirectGov that tells you about bank holidays. Now, it has all the information you need, and you'd think it'd be hard to do it better. But looking at how people actually use the site, we realised that what most people were searching for was the date of the next bank holiday. So we put that right to the top of the page, big and bold. We've done the same thing to more complex tasks, like working out how much maternity pay you're entitled to. Before, on DirectGov, you'd need to read all this information. On gov.uk, you just need to answer a few simple questions, and the site calculates the answer for you. In April 2013, we finished moving all departmental sites to gov.uk, together with the sites for Number 10 and the Deputy Prime Minister's office. So instead of every government page having a different design and different navigation, every site now looks and works the same way. At the same time, we've rethought how policy is presented online. Before gov.uk, if you wanted to understand government policy on something like gangs, for instance, you'd have needed to visit all these separate pages. Now, there's a single page for each policy, and all the departments involved share the responsibility for keeping it up to date. You can even subscribe to those policy pages so that you're always kept informed of any changes. And if you're responsible for a particular policy, you can find out how often it's being looked at and how closely it's being read. Today, gov.uk is handling more web traffic than the sites it replaced at a far lower cost, and users get to the information they need quicker than they did before. Gov.uk is not perfect, and it's not finished. It's never going to be. It's designed to improve, to react to user needs. We've made thousands of changes to gov.uk, and we make small improvements almost every day. This idea, iterative, responsive change, is at the heart of everything we do. You should visit us at www.gov.uk. Hopefully, you'll see something you like. Something simpler, clearer, and faster.
So I think that's pretty cool. I'm pretty pleased with that. And so how we got there is sort of interesting, but as Tom said, a huge part of that was the culture change that we managed to have inside government, and we like to think that this document is fairly imperative to that. But I thought, since Tom dropped it on me, I would explain something first. This is Tom yesterday talking about all the stuff we did and like the design principles and such. But I'm here to tell you that Tom didn't want us to have the design principles. He originally didn't think it was a good idea. It's true. Which in itself is a great lesson in what a flat organisation we are, that we could basically wait for him to go on holiday and then just do what we wanted. And he didn't fire us, which is nice. What he actually wanted us to do was something like this. So this is the BBC's GEL, which is a very sort of visually focused global experience language, which sort of dictates how things should look and feel on the BBC's websites. both Tom and I have worked at the BBC at various times, and we can tell you that this took a very, 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 very long time to make, and it's very, 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 very poorly implemented across their site. So I was really, really keen not to have this. So we didn't go with it. He wanted to have the GDS gel. We also dropped the gel acronym because we have enough acronyms. Design principles is plenty. And also, none of this really speaks to how people use the website. It's mostly about like keeping their brand very clean and fresh. And we wanted something a bit more than that, something sort of, I suppose it's more of we wanted the teaching how to fish rather than here's some fish mode of thinking about things. So why do we have the principles? As I said, it's mostly about culture change. I'm glad Tom made a big deal out of it. I've spoken to a couple of people who are speaking this couple of days, tomorrow and today, who also think culture change is pretty key to what we're doing in almost every aspect. And changing the language is a good way to start doing that. And it's mostly about getting everyone to understand that the experience of government services is everyone's responsibility, no matter what role you play in building those services. If you're a server-side monkey and the websites are slow, that's a bad user experience. If you're a policy writer and you can't make a plain language document, that's a problem. Users can't understand that either. So it's not just a visual problem, as far as I can tell. So the design principles became this very user-focused kind of almost, I want to say, it was almost like a cult to kind of go around like a mantra saying, what does the user need? What does the user need to everyone? It's sort of freaky, I have to say. But it works. It really works. Because if you manage to get that, then you're able to sort of start keeping yourself honest. This is something my friend James, who I used to work with, used to say all the time, that we need to keep ourselves honest. We need to make sure that we're not letting our own biases come in when we're building these services, because they're not for us as individuals, they're for everyone. It's Tim Berners-Lee's line about the internet, that it is for everyone. So what we did was we took what were some really just like scribbly index cards that we had stuck up on the wall in our original office, this sort of really crappy, awful office we had south of London, south of the river. And did they tear it down, or they did? They knocked it down. It was that bad. And we had these index cards up on the wall, and they had some sort of general values that we, as the team, kind of had. Things like, what does the user need? Content is king. Things like that. I think we had a few rude ones, but I can't remember exactly what they were right now. So that's lucky. And we decided that they were informing so much about what we were doing and keeping us honest that maybe we should sort of formalize them and share them with everybody else who we were coming in contact with, either in other departments or external people like yourselves. So we worked together as a team, multidiscipline team. I think there were project managers. Tom was there before, still hoping we call it the gel. There was myself, some back-end developers, content writers, all kinds of people came up with these principles together, and then they were wordsmithed by a wonderful man called Russell Davies. And these are the principles, so I'm going to go through them now for you. We should have plenty of time at the end for questions, so we can chat about any of them. And since Tom is now here, he can also probably lend a hand. He's shaking his head, but he will. He can't help himself. Anyway, so number one is start with user needs, and we put a big asterisk on the end of this one, because it was very important to us that we never have the user needs be that of the government, which is not exactly correct, because obviously they have the requirement to provide services, but ultimately the services are for the general public, the citizens, the residents, and for the people who work in governments who have to use these services on the other side. For every terrible government website, there is a more terrible back-end administration system, which I'm sure you've all used or have one and can think of one immediately that you hate. So it's both of those sides of things. And what we're really thinking about is, what is the user trying to achieve? What are their goals? When they come to a government website, what are they trying to do? 9 times out of 10, it's not something fun. No one comes to, it's not like going to Facebook or Twitter or something. You're not going to find a joke. You're usually coming to pay for something or request something, or often something much more tragic. So how do you find your user needs? You can't just go out and sort of guess. This is a picture we used to have in the window. I hope it's still there. This is like the view from our newer office down onto the tube station in London. You can see the people. Just to remind us that these are the people we're building stuff for. And it's everyone. It's whoever walks past that building. We sort of had to think about what the needs for those people were. And we were lucky that we had a lot of data because we were, as you saw from the video, we were replacing existing services to begin with. So we knew a lot about what people were doing on those services. There were analytics on those services for the most part. But it can be tricky to separate the true user needs from individuals who, let's say, the kind of people writing on your website saying, why can't I find this very specific thing that is very specific to me? You have to sort of take a more generalized view, and that's quite tricky. But you learn through trial and error, which is how we ended up with pages like this. I have to say, this was a Ben Terrett special. He was my old designer. I thought this was crazy, this big box. It was originally bright pink as well, so it was a bit, but we toned it down in the end. But we worked this out from looking at analytics and saying, well, what are people doing? What are the search terms when they come in? Let's serve the common case. This is the 90% case. Serve those people first, and then let's worry about those 10% and see what we can do for them. And their information is down further. Often, we want to understand what they're doing while they're going through this process. Sometimes this won't be the main thing they're doing. They may be coming here as part of another process, like they're looking up something for their school or their workplace. This is just one part of many chores someone is doing. The website is not the only thing they're doing. So that's why we come to the second principle of doing less, which sounds like, we just don't work as much, have a 4-day week, which would be nice, but that's not what I mean. Gov.uk is very austere looking, you may have noticed. That's because we were very careful to not add anything superfluous to any aspect of it. Everything on the website is tried and tested. There were some superfluous items, and it kind of makes me think of a chap I used to work with called Guy Morehouse, who is a brilliant graphic designer. And when he first joined Gov.uk, he was tasked with creating icons for the website, and they were gorgeous icons. And they were on the website. They were like the only piece of decoration that was really on the website. And after a little while, we did some testing on the website. We decided we would test these icons and see if they meant anything to anyone. And it turned out they didn't. So he and I sat there and removed all these icons. And he wasn't precious about it. He wasn't like, oh, but I poured all that time into this. He knew that the data spoke for itself, and this was the right time to do less on the website, because it was just a distraction. But there's also this aspect of it, doing less, the government doing less. As you saw on that video, what was it? Explaining what different kinds of waves or something. It's not really a government job. That's like a lifeguard job, or like if you're into oceanographics or whatever, I don't know, marine biology. This was my favorite one. This is a page that was about staying warm in the winter. And I think, if I can see it, there was a line somewhere about putting on a jumper or a sweater, which is not government advice. That's the kind of advice your mother's supposed to give you. So this went away. And it's sort of knowing that line that, there are experts out there who know better than the government sometimes on certain things. There was another page about beekeeping, for example. Why? That doesn't make sense. So it was a painful process to go through for some people, because they're like, well, we're the government. We can talk about whatever we like. We should say these things. Well, it's like, sometimes there's better resources for this, and it's okay to link to those people and let them take care of it. So stick to the things you're good at. Third principle is designing with data. I'm sure you're all sick of hearing about data by now, but honestly, it means you don't have to have any arguments anymore. You can just prove what you want with data. You can go out there and check your assumptions and find out what works and what doesn't work. GovUK does a lot of different kinds of testing. This is like some guerrilla testing, I think, in a public library. I don't remember. Just asking people what they think of a service. They do a lot of people coming in and recorded testing. Analytics is everywhere and very specialized. There's a lot of custom rules for stuff. So there's a very detailed understanding of what people are doing on the website and where they're going and how they're doing it, and where they came from, what they're doing next. And we've used data to sort of influence how we design the website. So to begin with, we thought everyone was going to come to our website from Google, which seems like a really reasonable assumption to make, right? I think we're pretty much all there on that. Google is everyone's homepage now. We kind of know that, right? So we thought everyone's going to come to our website from Google. So we very much optimized the site for that. Our homepage was just basically another Google. For GovUK, it was just one great big search bar. And then we tested that, and we realized we were missing a whole subsection of our populace who don't like searching. There's a huge number of people who don't like searching. They don't know how to form the queries. They don't know what they're searching for. They don't know the right words. They're afraid of it. They're not very literate, 101 reasons. So we had to go back and reevaluate our approach and say, well, okay, this serves the 60%. There's 40% of people who don't like this. And we wouldn't have known that if we hadn't have looked at the data clearly and trusted that data to tell us the truth. These are some folks in Oakland. So I'm currently working with Oakland City. They are in their very first user testing session. They had taken it upon themselves to redesign a website on their the oaklandnet.com website. It's a really terrible URL. We're going to fix that for them. We showed them how easy it is to set up user testing, bring some people in, see what they thought of things, and then immediately they really wanted to go off and change things based on that testing. So it's very powerful to have answers. Also, we noticed that Google Analytics in particular is very difficult to use and kind of tricky to understand without like a master's degree in data science. So this is Mai Ling, again from the City of Oakland, holding her first Web Analytics Club, where they now get together and talk about the analytics on their website, try to understand what's going on. The people around the table are from all sorts of different departments, not technical people, not designers. They are people who are interested in knowing how their content is being consumed, which I think is really cool. Yeah, I think that's great. I'm really pleased they started that. Also, there's cake. I think it's cut off, but there is cake. Cake is very fundamental to making government digital services, by the way, if you don't know that. Number 4, do the hard work to make it simple. So this is sort of building on that second principle of doing less. We're talking about taking the complexity out of the services, away from the way the users are looking at things, and taking that onus on as the government people. It's our job to make all of our... So there's many complicated things out there, like I think, let's think of one that would be applicable to the US, because obviously it was maternity leave. Don't think you do a lot of maternity leave. But things like that, they have very complicated calculations under the hood, but it shouldn't be up to the user to think about what those calculations are. They should just tell you what they know, which is generally that, simple things. It wouldn't be a talk from a British person about design if I didn't mention Johnny Ive, but this is a great quote. The quest for simplicity has to pervade every part of the process. It really is fundamental. Couldn't agree more. This is how he ends up with these sorts of calculators and such. This is a different one. This is for calculating the state pension. This is when I'll get to reach state pension age, 2051. It's really a long way away. But that is underneath there some very complicated maths, and like different criteria affect the outcome. But that is hidden from the user. They don't have to worry about that. The 5th principle is iterate this, iterate again, which I'm sure there's some joke in there, but GovUK is never finished. We keep trying things, we keep moving, we keep having to test our assumptions because they won't be correct forever. Our users will change over time. They will become more tech savvy, less tech savvy. The technology will change. The policies will change. Everything will change. So you have to be ready for that. You have to embrace change as not this scary, I'm never finished feeling, as so much as I get to keep going, yay. So we have this rough outline for all the services that we build. We start with a very, very tiny, minimal viable product, which is just to see if it feels right. And then we take it through the alpha, beta, live cycle. I know Tom's presentation yesterday had the big diagram, and the live has a feedback loop. They all pretty much follow that pattern. And this is just, again, it's all about testing our assumptions and finding out early if we've made a mistake. The old model, of course, was getting all the way down to here, having blown millions and having got the wrong answer. Whereas now you nip it in the bud very early if you're going wrong. And I know that at GDS there have been projects that have been nipped in the bud early. And I don't think anyone is sad about that or feels bad about that. It's just the way it goes, and that's fine. Number 6 is build for inclusion, which is very much about the accessibility side. But it also is talking about the fact that users are not necessarily coming to your website from desktop machines anymore. I think we all know now that the smartphone is pretty much ruling the web these days. Especially in lower income brackets, I know that we have found that many people's only access to the internet is via a smartphone, often only over 3 or 4G, which is not fantastic. We took the assumption on gov.uk that it would be accessible from day one. There would be no bolt-ons after the fact. Everything would work in a sensible way. We would use user research to work out what those sensible ways were. Most people who do accessibility work will lean on something like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Many of the rules in there are rather black and white and do not reflect the sort of changing technology landscape we're seeing. So we firmly believe in user research trumps academic ideals. So much so that I know gov.uk, this is from their old blog, it doesn't look like this anymore, but they didn't have an accessibility statement because accessibility statement is, talking about a point in time when something was deemed correct, as opposed to this evolving service which was always going to work well for everyone. Bucking the trend slightly and ignoring the rules, so to speak, but for a better outcome. And I know in the US there are other accessibility considerations. Many of your cities have legislation that says your content should be in more than one language, and Spanish, Chinese. That has to be taken into consideration, and many of the CMSs I know you're using don't necessarily support that very well. These are the kind of things we have to start thinking about. Gov.uk has to be in English and Welsh. Number 7 is understand context, which again is sort of twofold. Context means a couple of different things. So it's about how you work, the context of how you're working, and then what you produce. I mentioned that I worked at the BBC, which is a great organisation, and they're fantastic people. And you would think that they're very agile and modern, but in fact they have a very traditional view of a lot of technology development. Designers sit in one place, throw designs over to developers, who then throw things over to producers. You can imagine if you tilt it this way, it is a waterfall. And these things happen. Even in agile environments, these things can still happen. You see a sprint wall of work coming up, and it's like, well, we need the designers to do this before we can do this, before we can do this. And I really dislike that, which is, I think Tom mentioned, it's important that everyone can work together very closely, so it's not this sort of, oh, you need to do your job before I can do my job, because that slows everything down, and it's not a good mechanism for getting anything done. I also am a big fan of designing in the browser. Knowing the context of your stuff is on the web, so maybe design there. I really hate Photoshop. Photoshop isn't for making websites. It's for making posters. We pretty much all the designers at gov.uk code. They mostly design in browser. They can implement their own designs, and I think that's pretty important. As much as you expect a print designer to understand qualities of paper and inks, the designers of the web should understand the browsers and the technology. We made it easier for them by building a prototyping system. We use Jekyll and Heroku, which are very easy to use, lightweight pieces of software that let any designer throw stuff up on the web to show their ideas off, so they don't need to produce Photoshop files anymore. The other kind of context, of course, is how people are using your website. So this is like the old mobile view. It's one of the old icons. Oh, poor icons. But you have to take, like this one is a great example. This is about bullying at school. Like the context of that, where do you imagine that is? It's probably, kids on their own in their bedroom, maybe, or parents, standing at the school gate. You have to think about those sorts of contexts. They're not necessarily, in our fancy computer labs, We can also have fun with it too. This is a fun one. On our holidays, we put bunting on the website. It's kind of cute, right? That's like a fun context, right? It's like a happy day. You can have a bit of fun with it. I like that one. I thought the bunting was going to be stupid, but I've changed my mind. Everyone can change their mind, it's fine. 8, build digital services, not websites. I liked that Tom mentioned that he specifically encourages use of the word digital, not technology, or internet-y things, because we are building services. Services don't begin and end on the sites. for example, in the UK, we have a tax disc system. They're like the little thingies that go on the card to say you've paid your tax. That's paying for that tax disc is only part of the story. There's the bit when you go out to put the thing on your car, or when you've had to photocopy some paperwork or something. Taking another example, it's like buying a ticket for a gig. The ticket is only part of that process. Going to the gig is part of the process too. Deciding you want to go. No one is coming to your website for fun. They came there for a reason, and they probably don't want to stick around. Excuse me. So the more seamlessly you can move your users in and out of your site again, the better. We have really interesting analytic rules for gov.uk where we're sort of recording how long people are on the website, but we don't want them to be there too long. We have to check they've only been there the right amount of time. It's very tricky to work out. But we're not looking for lots of clicks and lots of time spent browsing, because that's probably a bad thing. Principle 9 is be consistent, not uniform. This is, I was thinking about it last night. This is actually kind of like the reason I did not want the gel. The gel has a very kind of black and white way of looking at the world. Everything has to be a specific way. Whereas when you're developing services that are for everyone, they often have to have different effects, different ways of being used. These are all different gov.uk sites. They are different. They have different purposes. The one up there is for like regular citizen advice or citizen sort of information. Further over there, we've got some sort of international stuff. This is some of the performance platform stuff. They are different. They have different purposes, different audiences, but they largely feel the same. So a user can kind of still trust that it's part of the same world, and they know that it's coming from the respected source. So not being a slave to a design library or design pattern seems good. And that's why having a gel probably would have been a mistake. That we can only ever advise a way to build a website. You can't say this is the way, because your usage may vary or your audience may vary. And the same goes under the hood. These systems are not necessarily written in the same language. The gov.uk has some Ruby, it's got Scala, it's got some Go, it's got all kinds of different languages, and it's designed that way so that although the users will feel like it's one system, it's written in the appropriate language for the thing it's trying to achieve. And then the final principle is make things open and make things better, which is like the heart one. But it's also, we are on GitHub, it is open source. That's good. I met someone recently who said they were going to start writing a thesis on GDS, if you can imagine such a thing. And he was amazed at how much he could just find on the internet about us, always us. Because it's all out there. Everyone blogs prolifically. Everything is open source. All the code is right there. You could, obviously, as we're a government, you can FOI everything. There's no point in hiding anything. And I think it's working. Everyone seems to kind of like what we're putting out there, so that's good. And it's sort of, what we wanted to do was really encourage everyone to commit to that, as I said at the beginning, making the user experience good. The design principles were designed to work well for everyone, no matter their role. So if you're a policy person, or you're a coder, or you're a designer, you should be able to take the principles wholesale and apply them to the work that you do, because that will help you with your culture change. And if you change your language and your culture, you can end up with it proliferating all the way through to the very highest levels of your government, much like this.
Reform the delivery of public services. They are designed around the needs of the user, rather than has been far too often the case in the past, being designed to suit the convenience of the government.
Gary Streeter, Mr. Speaker.
It's always like old men going, yeah, I like that, it's really good. That's the House Department. That's Francis Maud, who is the Minister for the Cabinet Office. And I guess we have to thank for battling to let us exist. So those are the principles. Talk on the ground, all the way to the top. I am done talking. I can take some questions, and we can chat about any aspect. I see a hand, I see two hands. I see a lot of light, so...
I just wanted to ask, I know a lot of times when you're doing, site redesigns and things like that, users have a lot of times unfounded pushback in terms of, they just hate your site for no reason, or the new redesign. And I just wanted to know how you guys mitigated that.
They get over it.
Sure.
People don't like change. It's just a fact. After a while, the change doesn't change anymore, and it's just a normal. So you just have to trust your instincts with a lot of it. Sorry. Most people didn't freak out. The only thing they did freak out was they didn't think it looked like a government website anymore, which was kind of weird. It's like, okay, I guess that's true. Yeah, mission accomplished, indeed. Hello.
Hi. How do you deal with departments whose egos are more important to them than analytics and data? And they think that
I saw Tom do sharp intake of breath.
I think you know what I mean. I don't think I need to explain that further.
What should I say, Tom?
Should we chat after?
Take them on a journey. I mean, the truth is we have some very, very powerful leaders. Thanks for Francis Miller, actually the minister. So, alongside the capabilities of development services, you also run spec control for whole government technology spend. Okay. So,
Sorry, I can reiterate. Yeah, so GDS got to the point where they get to say who spends what money. So all the spend, I can't remember the level of the cap now, but
there's no
it's
cap.
not a lot cap.
Yeah.
But if a department wants to spend money on anything deemed digital, they have to come to GDS and get it approved. So that certainly put a spanner in the works of some with large egos, I think.
I mean,
Yeah.
we actually went to cabinet, so the very top, the ministerial meeting of all the senior ministers, and got them to sign off the fact that we were going to turn off all the websites and go to gov.uk. After which, all the moaning is noise.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
and
It's much like the noise from the users. It's like it'll be fine.
But this is, I mean, we present a very kind of cuddly and friendly face, and people like Francis are fantastic at portraying the positive side. You can't deny it gets ugly, and you need to do some street fighting and some knife fighting. There's just no two ways about it. We just don't stand up on stage and say that very often, but that's the truth.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we're very lucky that we have people like Tom and Mike Bracken who are willing to go and do those fights for us and keep. Etienne said that? They are our shit umbrellas. They look after us and take the flak.
Hi, Jonathan. So you guys have done a really great job with user experience on the website, and obviously there's a lot of frustration, not just with the websites of government, but with forms and PDF forms. So I'm curious if you guys have any opinions on is there applying user experience principles to PDFs?
PDFs are awful, and we are mostly trying to crush them and turn them into web forms. There are many forms in the UK government too. Many of them are actually paper forms. A great example is there's a service for the lasting power of attorney, which is a service where you go and give somebody else the ability to take care of your assets and in your life, essentially, if you're looking at being in a bad state at some point. And that was a very large set of paper, which we converted into a form. But as part of that, they also redesigned the paper form. And there is a piece of guidance on gov.uk/service manual, which describes how to redesign forms, paper forms, which could easily be applied to the PDFs too if the PDF had to exist. But frankly, PDFs, yeah.
So I'm a huge believer in user-centric design, but just to play devil's advocate, when you focus so much on the needs of users, those needs have actually been shaped by the services you're offering in the first place. So it's a great way to optimize delivery of existing things.
That's
it's
right.
not a great way to reinvent a new kind of service delivery process from scratch. So I wondered is that important to GDS? Do you have different processes for use in those kind of situations?
Yeah, I mean, there have been times when the policies themselves have been changed because as we went through redesigning the service, we found that they just didn't work and they were anachronistic or wrong or based on some crazy person's belief that something should happen in a certain way. I think in the future, when things new policies, I guess, happen, they will be designed with the digital side and the user side from the beginning. Like policies won't now be like policy service delivery. It'll be more like service delivery and policy together. So yeah.
I think that's why I talked yesterday about going right back to policy intent, which is what is your policy intended to achieve from a sort of social outcome perspective. From that, in many cases, the user needs are obvious if the service portfolio is reasonably static. We've got a couple of big cases in the UK with changing the way we view tax from a series of 26 vertically aligned taxes to one tax account, that you can't start with user needs because you've already blown people's minds that you can be that simple. So from that perspective, you have to really start with the user research is very different. You're really trying to understand people's perception around the change, and are you going to achieve your intent with such a change? So.
No, we're still good. We've got time. Anybody else? There's one right at the back. So I knew Tom wouldn't be able to help himself. He would be speaking.
Hi. Does the application of these design principles, does it change when you are designing for a mobile application or for tablet use? Do you find that there's a difference in user experience or user needs when you transition to mobile?
So that's why we have the understanding context principle, because sometimes usage on a phone or a tablet is going to be different. But the design principles don't dictate anything about the user experience or the design itself. They're merely saying how you should think about going about working out what those are. There is another companion book, tome, called the Service Manual, which is much more dictative about how you might go about doing mobile design or thinking about that difference in devices. So you should probably take a look at that. But the design principles doesn't have any opinion about how you should do it, just like the whys, really. Oh, so bright.
You work with different departments, and when you go to these stakeholders and they say, no, we know what the user needs are, how do you convince them?
We show them the data. It doesn't take much. Or we show them some user testing. That's pretty convincing too. Sometimes they do know, and that's fine. It's great if they know, but it's good for them to just reevaluate if they're still correct and test it again. I don't think we've ever had someone be like, really, seriously though, it's this way. No one really does that. They kind of know their numbers up, really. Yeah. Anybody else? I see some more hands. More hands. Hi, Maya.
Hey, Francis. Good job. I'm just curious, what's been the biggest difference or most interesting for you coming from the evolution of with the UK and then now in Oakland in the city context of the US?
It's interesting. The city context is interesting to me because it's so much closer to the actual people. It's so much more about local community, whereas I feel like working on a central government, you're sort of like up here, whereas now I feel like I'm down here, which is really interesting. They have different things to think about because of that, because they are, they want to be friends with their community, whereas the UK government doesn't really want to be friends with you, which is fine. They're not supposed to be your friends. They're there to provide a service for you. They work for you, whereas I think a local city is more like they work for you and they want to have a drink with you, which is a nice difference, I think. Yeah.
You mentioned one thing kind of in passing in your presentation that I thought was interesting, which is that you don't, inside GDS, you're not limiting choice of programming language. Like you have a consistent style, you have all these things, but you don't limit that. And I've seen and been in a lot of technologically forward-thinking places that still feel an institutional temptation to limit that, feeling like it'll bring efficiencies internally. And I'm wondering if you have any, how your team has dealt with that and how you feel about that.
It's partly through the hires. There is a lot of Ruby, I'll be honest. But most of the proliferation of languages is happening now in the departments because the department will hire a team and they happen to specialize in something different, and then that dictates them what they build in. So it's sort of applicationally siloed code bases. So it's not so much as it's all mixed together. There are some very clever sort of service level applications that then sort of provide that joined up part. But it's mostly through the hiring that's happening. I think it's dangerous to say government can be fixed with this technology because then everyone jumps on that bandwagon and it hasn't actually fixed anything. It's not so much what the code, so much as what you do with it that matters. So, if I was to say Ruby fixed the government, that would be a mistake.
What does the conversation around metrics look like when you guys start looking at different services, and who makes the decisions around that? How does that get defined?
There are various different kinds of metrics. I think the big one is the government departments were told they had to spend less on their services every year. I can't remember the numbers now. They had to save something per head. I can't remember. Can we get the mic to Tom? He'll explain that really well.
So there's a whole bunch of sort of web analytics-y kind of numbers where you leave the teams to it to optimize. But there are 4 key headline metrics that we publish for all services, which was an interesting journey in and of itself. They are cost per transaction. That's the most important in many ways for this administration. They are completion rate. That's really important too. They are user satisfaction. And I think the 4th one's dwell time, is how long you spend on it, doing it. And we try, and the interesting part of that was mandating again, going right to the top to say every single service is going to publish these on the open web. And I think if we hadn't gone right to the top for that, most of them wouldn't have published that data because some of it is truly astounding. £700 per transaction is the worst. $1,000 per transaction.
So yeah, who decided? The people in charge. It's that simple, really. Yeah. Anybody else? There's one over there. What time are we doing?
Hey, Fran. Yeah, great talk. Really appreciated it. Seems to me like one of the enemies of kind of design is exploding content. And I feel like, as in content that grows very rapidly and outside the bounds of what you designed, and I feel like government has that problem a lot. How do you deal with that?
So yeah, I mean, you saw all the stuff we killed. I mean, that was after probably a decade or 2 of proliferation. Gov.uk has a really shit-hot content team. So there was a wonderful woman called Sarah, who now has sadly left, but working on another great thing, who pretty much laid down the rules for what could go on the website content-wise. She wrote a very good style guide. At the very, very beginning, we had a thing called the Needotron, which was basically a big list of all the needs we had identified, and the content was written to match those needs. And we saw sometimes they merged or they split and things. But basically, I think the responsibility is now with the departments for their content again. Is that correct? But those needs are all represented.
Which are like 95% of the demand. So we changed the editor. We changed the model fundamentally from departments being responsible for every single bit of content to say, for the top 1,000 user needs, we need to professionalize and centralize this process. So we in GDS are going to do that. We're going to hire some fantastic content designers. Note the words. We don't call them editorial people or policy people. They're designers of content. They are going to write the material for the top 1,000 needs, and you, the department, are going to fact check it. Okay, so there's a process of fact checking. Beyond the 1,000 needs, we leave it to departments, and we have an approved model where we in GDS spot check quality, and we can remove publishing rights from people in departments if the quality is not good enough, and bring it back into GDS again.
And the CMS we built for the Gov.uk actually has all that built into it as well. So there is a second pair of eyes process it goes through. You can see every piece of content go through each process step. So it's all kind of quite rigid, I guess. Sounds funny saying it, but it is quite rigid. Yeah. Okay, last one, maybe.
I don't really know if this has a quick answer, but hopefully. I was wondering if maybe you can, very quick advice you can have for organizations that might not necessarily have as good of a starting point. Yes, granted, the websites, you had a very good base level for analytics, I think you mentioned. So for example, I am currently tasked with revamping a part of our website that's extremely old. It's the oldest part of the website. And so I don't have analytics for every single button. And so there's buttons that we want to get rid of. And so it's just kind of even watching the tremendous work you did, it almost seems like you were starting from a great place, at least in terms of analytics.
Wow, no one's described direct was great.
And this, you had insights.
Insights. But it sounds like in your case, if I'm going to be really specific, if you've got a very old website, whatever you do is probably going to be better. So don't worry about it. Use your instincts. It's probably going to be fine. And then start recording as soon as you can. It's difficult with stuff that doesn't have analytics. I would get some on there now, if there isn't, and just do maybe a month's recording and see what you get. It's okay not to know and just guess for a while. I think that's okay. You're not going to go that wrong. I don't think we ever went that wrong. Did we? No. I don't know what else to tell you really. I mean, it's just that simple. Just yeah. I suppose it is a short answer. There might be a long answer. Maybe we can chat about it later. Yeah.
There's a really, really good blog post by a woman called Lisa Reichelt on how you. Sorry, we blog so often that when Frances leaves us, she loses some of the more recent blog posts. Yeah, it's a shame. Shouldn't have left. I shouldn't have married that engineer from Google. And there's a really good blog post about how do you identify user needs by Lisa Reichelt, and it's a 4-step process. The first of which is you get experienced people to guess. The second step is you then test with data. The third step is you then test with users, and the fourth step is you then iterate that process again and keep on going. So I just reiterate: there's no absolute. Even though you design with data, there's no absolute hard science to it. You've got to start with a bit of a gut instinct and then iterate from there with data.
I think we're done. That was the last one, right?
That was the last one. Yep. Great.
Thank you, everyone. Nice to see you all.